At my retirement party, my daughter-in-law slipped something into my drink, so I switched glasses. The banquet room at the community center smelled like buttercream and coffee, white balloons nudging the ceiling as a 70s playlist hummed beneath the chatter. My son, Daniel, laughed with coworkers, oblivious. Kayla's glossed smile didn't reach her eyes as condensation slid down my champagne flute. I watched her take something from her clutch, a quick dip over my glass, the bubbles snapping a little too sharp for a heartbeat. I smiled like any proud teacher retiring after 40 years, slid my glass aside as if making room for the sheet cake, and traded it for the one by her plate. "To Margaret!" someone called, and the room lifted their drinks. The AC sighed, and my knees felt suddenly younger, steady as marble. Kayla reached for the glass I'd set in front of her, her manicure flawless, her knuckles pale. Our eyes met, and she blinked once. Too slow. The rim brushed her lip. The citrus tickle of my own untouched champagne teased my nose while I kept mine hovering, waiting. The chandelier halos trembled on the surface. The room went quiet in that silly, sacred way people get before a toast. I heard the faint tap of a spoon on crystal, felt the prickle at my neck, and tilted my glass a whisper, watching her pause. If you're wondering how a woman like me ends up testing family at her own retirement party, I'll show you everything that led to this moment. The missing pills, the bitter coffee, the accidents that never felt accidental, and the way Kayla always asked about my pension with sugar on her tongue. The whispers in the hallway, the bank notifications at odd hours, the apology flowers that wilted too fast. I've spent a lifetime teaching kids to trust their instincts. This time, I had to trust mine to stay alive and protect my son. If you believe the truth belongs even at the prettiest parties, subscribe and stay with me, because the real story starts before the first toast. The room held its breath, and for a second, I could hear the faint buzz of the light fixtures and the wet squeak of a balloon rubbing the ceiling. My name rose and fell in a wave. To Margaret, and Kayla's hand trembled just enough that her ring caught the chandelier and split the light across her wrist. The rim touched her lip. I tilted my glass, my wrist steady from years of chalk and overhead markers, and waited. She blinked once, too slow. A drop clung to the edge, hung there, and slipped against her lipstick. That was all. She set her glass down with a bright, tinny laugh, a fraction off the beat of everyone else's cheer, and dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. I brought my own flute to my mouth and let the bubbles sting the tip of my tongue. Just a polite sip. And I felt my shoulders drop, stayed steady on my feet while everyone clapped, and the old Bee Gees tune started again. Somewhere near the buffet table, someone tore the first slice of sheet cake, the sound of the knife on cardboard loud as a cymbal in that silly, sacred hush that follows any toast. My son, Daniel, flashed me a grin over the heads and confetti, his face, as it has been since he was a little boy at a school play, hopeful and proud. He didn't see the way Kayla's hand hovered near her glass, then slid it farther from her plate. She smiled in the general direction of everyone, and smoothed her hair like a news anchor returning from commercial. My name is Margaret Barnes, and if I carried myself like any other teacher who'd just collected her gold watch and a stack of cards with apples on them, it was because I have learned that steadiness is a kind of armor. 40 years in Cleveland public schools taught me to move gently through chaos. Fights over pencils, tears over long division, phone calls to mothers who worked 2 jobs and apologized in weary whispers. I stood every morning in the doorway of room 12 at Harvey Elementary and said, "Good morning, sweetheart," or "Come on in, honey," to kids who returned the words like they weren't quite sure where to put them. The halls always smelled like Elmer's glue and winter boots. We did spelling lists and paper snowflakes, fractions on the overhead projector, and later, on the smart board that flickered in the heat. I brought in donuts on state testing days, but I called them practice donuts because I didn't want the kids thinking a treat needed to be earned by stress. I used to take the early bus even when I still had my car because I liked to see my city wake up. In the winter, the buses were damp with coats. In the spring, they smelled faintly of shampoo and rain. I'd step down by the corner store where Mr. Ahmed would already be sweeping salt off the threshold, and he'd save me the last blueberry muffin if I'd called the day before to say I was craving one. That was the spine of my life, punctuated by school bells, anchored by the lunches I packed in old yogurt containers. Even now, even retired, you can set your watch by my routines. My grandson, Mason, jokes that I'm like the church bells that still ring on Lorraine Avenue, even though no one goes inside much anymore. When you teach, your days are mostly sacrifices so small they look like lint. You give up your decent shoes to stand on tile for hours. You give up your voice twice a year, whispering to kids who'd never learned to whisper back. You give up Saturdays to set up a science fair, Sundays to grade spelling tests while the Browns try to do their best in the background. You give up the idea of getting through your own grief uninterrupted by anybody else's. When Daniel's father died, he was a lineman with the city. There was an accident on West 117th and nothing dramatic at all, just the sort of mistake that becomes a before and an after. I sold my wedding set that summer to keep Daniel in band camp and to pay for the brakes on our old Ford. I told him the pawn ticket was a receipt for a donation to the school library. He was 13 and wanted to be kind more than he wanted to be curious, and I leaned on that because I had to. I packed dinners in thermoses. I tutored twice a week. When the principal asked if I could cover an extra reading group so the district could stretch the budget, I smiled and said yes. That small word paid for Dee's cleats, the fees for his AP tests, the extra gas when I let him use the car so he could drive himself to work at the grocery store. I did not mind. The story of my life, if you're looking for a headline, is that I have always been willing to be the person who says yes and stays late. Daniel grew up to be good with codes and projects and people. He works now in a glass building where the air smells like orange peels and printed slides. He met Kayla at a barbecue hosted by the HR department. There was a photo booth and a table with too many desserts. She had a laugh like chimes and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. The first time she came to my house for Sunday dinner, she brought a strawberry pie that slid a little in the car, sugar pooling on the crust. I gave her my good pie server, the one with the etched handle that was my mother's, and she said, "Oh gosh, you don't have to fuss like that, Margaret," but she took it anyway and put it in her tote bag when we were clearing the plates. I didn't mind. That's how we start new stories, by pretending not to mind things. She called me Maggie, which I have never been, not even in high school. I didn't correct her that first afternoon, and after that it felt like I'd waited too long to fix it. It's funny how a small name can make you feel like a coat that doesn't belong to your body. Daniel watched her, leaning back in his chair like he was still 23 and trying not to make his feelings too obvious. She told us about her marketing startup that wasn't a startup anymore, about how she'd learned to surf at a retreat in Santa Barbara and developed a taste for kale that survived the Ohio winter. She told me she'd love to help me redecorate my bungalow. "Open it up, let it breathe," she said, standing in the archway between the dining room and the living room, her hands framing my bookshelf the way an architect frames a space in a movie. "That couch has had a good life," she added, smiling. And I smoothed the arm where the fabric had gone shiny in a patch from Daniel's head when he used to fall asleep there after late shifts. When they married, it was under a canopy of fairy lights in a park in Tremont, and I wore a navy blue dress and a jacket with tiny beaded cuffs. Mason arrived a year later, always running, and then Ava, who preferred to arrange things, stones, crayons, the pears I put in the fruit bowl. Kayla was efficient in a way I had never been. She put timers on the kids' tablets and labels on the toy bins, color-coded the entire pantry. She joined the parent council at the preschool and moved through the bake sale like a cruise ship, calm and large and unavoidable. It wasn't that she was unkind. It was that her kindness was transactional, her attention a resource to be allocated. At first, the small things I noticed were the kinds of things any mother-in-law might chalk up to taste. She told me to use different soap on my countertops. She made a face when I put gravy on the table in the measuring cup because I couldn't find the boat, then went into my cabinets without asking to reorganize the serving dishes so I would know where everything was next time. She tilted her head when I used a paper napkin instead of cloth on a weeknight. She laughed, just a little, when I used my phone's flashlight like a magnifying glass at a restaurant. "Oh, Maggie," she'd say, with that bright tone that could mean affection or disapproval, depending on which way the light hit it. There were other things that weren't about taste. They were about boundary lines. She offered to manage my online bills. We don't want you to miss anything, you know how these portals are. When I was still teaching and coming home with my feet swollen and my brain full of fractions. Thank you, I told her, but I like to keep my own envelopes. She smiled and brought me a reusable folder with stars on it and a list of suggested passwords anyway. She asked once at Easter, her fork resting in her ham, if I'd named beneficiaries to my pension. She said it the way she might have asked if the rolls needed warming. Just curious, that's all. We're so proud of you, she added, her hand on my forearm like a reassurance, though the question hung between us like a wire. Things began to tilt, slowly, the way a picture frame slides down a wall when the nail loosens, and then one day you think, that's not where I hung that. I'm careful with my medications, small white tablets for blood pressure, a chalky one for cholesterol, and I keep them in a clear organizer that I fill on Saturday afternoons while I watch the birds at the feeder. One Tuesday, I opened the little door marked WED and found only one of the 2 pills it should hold. I told myself I must have been distracted, maybe by the cardinal with the crooked beak I'd been hoping would come back. 2 weeks later, I found a pill under the kitchen table, a tiny moon collecting dust. I told myself I'd dropped one and it rolled. I told myself a lot of things you say when you live with other people's schedules pressing against your own. A month before the party, Kayla brought me coffee from the cafe near her yoga studio. You have to try their lemon latte. It's weird but amazing. And it tasted bitter in a way sugar couldn't fix. I drank 2 sips and held onto the counter while a wave moved over me like a shadow passing. Kayla said, "Oh gosh, are you okay? It's so warm in here," and opened the window. Daniel said later that maybe I hadn't eaten enough. I agreed, because we all wanted me to be the kind of person who didn't worry about small shadows. There was the rug she put at the top of my basement steps, one of those thin ones with rubber on the back that isn't really rubber anymore. "Cozy," she said, and I thought of how I go down those stairs holding the rail, my heels searching for the edge. There was the time she swung by to borrow my car because Daniel had mine, and hers was at the shop, and she didn't return it until after school pickup. She texted, "Sorry, you know how it is, traffic." When I climbed in the next morning, the passenger seat was slid way back, and a small bottle of something rolled out from under it and knocked against my shoe. Sleep tabs. I picked it up. "Oh gosh," she said later when I mentioned it. "I had those from when I went to Seattle. I can't sleep on planes, but I didn't drink a drop." She laughed, and I laughed. We both left our mouths open a little too long, like people do when they're not sure what their faces should say next. I'm not a woman who cries wolf. I've spent my life telling children, if something doesn't feel right, we say so. If your friend is rough with you on the playground, you move your feet. If your stomach hurts every morning, we figure out what's happening. You don't sit with bad feelings like they're company you invited. But it's hard to say those things to yourself when the person making you uneasy is the person your son has chosen. The person who carries your grandchildren's snacks in color-coded baggies. The person who wears your mother's pie server in her kitchen like an heirloom you offered her. I asked my doctor to check my blood pressure. "Steady as a metronome," he said, peering over his glasses. I asked the pharmacist to print the full list of side effects for my medications, and then I read them under a magnifying glass at the dining table. I called Chase when a notification pinged my phone at 1:13 a.m. for an attempted login. There was a pause on the other end, and then a young man named Luis said, "Ma'am, it looks like someone tried a wrong password 3 times, and then the system locked out. We'll send you a new card just to be safe." I changed my passwords using the names of the long-ago cats we had when Daniel was little, the ones he loved so much he carried them around like they were plush toys. I did not tell anyone in my family about that phone call. It sat in my pocket like a pebble. My friend Lila, from school, she ran the cafeteria for 25 years. The children called her the lunch queen. Stopped by with a casserole when it all began to feel like too many pebbles to carry. We sat at my kitchen table, the one with the nick in the corner from the time Daniel forgot there was a stool behind him when he pulled out his chair. I told her about the coffee, the missing pills, the bank notice, the rug. She listened the way she always has, with her hands wrapped around a mug like she was holding her questions in place. "You trust your gut," she said finally. "There's being careful, and there's being asked to be someone you aren't." You've never been a woman who doubts herself on purpose. That was the week the retirement party invitations went out. Kayla volunteered to organize. It was sweet, she said to Daniel in front of me, and generous of her, I agreed, even as my nape prickled. She set up a group chat with my colleagues, picked a room at the community center where Daniel used to go for preschool story time. She picked menu options: deviled eggs, meatballs in a sauce, a sheet cake with a chalkboard design. And she asked about the music, tapped her nails on her phone while I said I'd like something from the 70s. Anything anybody can hum. I made my own preparations. I left my purse in the car and slid my phone into the pocket of my jacket. I asked Lila to sit where she could see the table. I told her it might be nothing and that I hoped it would be nothing and that, if it was something, I needed her to be the kind of witness the world believes. Not because she is more reliable than me, but because sometimes, when you're a woman in your 60s and you say you're worried, people hear the word lonely. At the party, the room smelled just like it always does on Sundays when the seniors from St. Luke's have their pancake breakfast in the next hall over, coffee and butter and the faint metallic note of folding chairs. I stood under the paper apple garland someone had put up, shook hands, hugged my way through the people who made my life beautiful. Mr. Ahmed from the corner store, who insisted on paying for the meatballs, kids who weren't kids anymore, one of them a nurse, another a bus driver, one with a toddler on her hip who kept saying, "This is Mrs. Barnes," like a song. The principal, bless him, read a poem that rhymed in places it shouldn't have, and I cried the way you cry when you haven't let yourself cry all day. Quietly, and with great relief, the toasts began. Kayla kept herself near the head of the table, efficient with the knife, instructing the teenagers from the church youth group on how to pour the sparkling wine so it bubbled but didn't slosh. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the way you watch a basketball game without wanting to be overhead about it. She moved like a person who believes themselves invisible because everyone likes them. The clutch purse stayed near her plate. She laughed at something the music teacher said and reached down, and when she came up, her hand hovered over my glass, and she did not look at me. I slid my glass aside as if to make room for the cake. I set the drink in front of her place setting. I thought of how many times I'd told a child, if you know the answer, you still have to show your work. My work, in this case, was swallowing the urge to throw the glass into the trash, to call for silence and fold the moment into words. Not yet, I thought. Not while my son stood 10 feet away laughing. Not while people who loved me stood with full plates and children under their arms. If what I suspected was true, I would be steady, and I would be kind, and I would not ruin the sweetness of their gift to me. After the toast, after that single drop touched her mouth and she set the flute away, Kayla excused herself with a smile and a hand to her stomach, the universal sign for a lady taking a breath. She made her way to the restroom, shoes clipping faintly on the polished floor. Lila looked at me, her eyebrows rising like small birds. I nodded. My knees felt like they belonged to someone younger, someone who hadn't had them under desks for most of her adult life. I found my way to the cake table, cut a slice for Mason with extra frosting. Ava likes the corner pieces, she always has. And by the time Kayla returned, breath mint bright on her mouth, her smile had a thinness to it, like a page turned carefully so it wouldn't tear. She stood at my elbow as people continued to tell generous stories about me, the way you do at a party like that. You remember that time you stayed with my class during the fire drill, even though it was your planning period? You're the one who taught my daughter to write a thank you note. Your bulletin boards always looked like we lived inside a storybook. I held those gifts in my hands and kept them there. Kayla clapped at each, turned to me, squeezed my arm. Her grip had that polished cheer I had come to recognize, practiced but empty of weight. She leaned close enough for perfume to find me, something citrusy and clean, and said softly, "You must be exhausted. It's a lot for you." I thought then of the summer I gave up a tiny raise so the school could afford a new set of math texts, of the evenings I spent rewriting a lesson plan so the English as a second language kids could find the verbs before the verbs found them. I thought of the nights I ate toast and eggs at my sink, because it was what I could make with the last of my energy. Exhaustion hadn't made me careless. It had made me present. And in that present moment, my son's wife stood at my side and tried to arrange my story so it fit inside the picture frame she preferred. Daniel's speech came last. He doesn't do speeches. He shrugged and looked at his shoes and ran his hand over his hair the way he used to when he was trying to figure out how to ask me for $20. He said, "Mom, you are the reason I know that showing up is an art and that you can love people without smothering them." He said other things that would embarrass him if I wrote them all down. He cried, and I pretended not to see. The way we pretend not to see the kindness of those we love, because naming it is like opening a window in January. When the room began to break apart, when the balloons bobbed and children shoved chairs and someone started wrapping pieces of cake in paper napkins for people to take home, I stood still amid the movement. Kayla was cleaning up the wrapping paper from my gifts, efficient, her hands moving quickly. The faintest tremor sat in the corner of her jaw, the kind that might have meant a headache, might have been anger. Our eyes met. Hers slid away. Daniel kissed my temple the way he does when he thinks I am feeling something too big to say out loud, and went to help load the car with gifts and a vase of flowers. On my plate lay Kayla's napkin, the lipstick exactly the shade she always wears, something with an assertive name like Perennial or Pinnacle. Her glass, the one I had placed at her setting, still held a 1/4 inch of bubbles gone flat. I took up the napkin and pressed it into my sleeve with emotion so natural it made me proud of my years teaching sleight of hand to children. Magic shows for book fairs and classroom skits. I picked up her glass. Lila came to my side, as if to wipe the table. She met my eyes for only a second, a simple thing that seemed like a rope thrown across a gap. At home that night, in the kitchen where the light makes the floor look newer than it is, I set the glass in the back of my refrigerator behind the jar of pickles. I washed my hands. I fed the cat, even though he had likely had 2 dinners already. I sat down and opened my planner. It is not fancy. It cost me $4.99 at Target and has a cartoon lemon on the cover. I wrote 2 things. Call Dr. Patel about side effects. Call Angela M., attorney, Lila's cousin, elder law. Then I added, breakfast with Daniel this week, just us. The quiet of my house did that thing quiet does after a party. It spun in my ears and then settled. I ran through names of possibilities like beads, one finger after the other. Misunderstanding, stress, panic, malice, help. People don't fall out of the sky with labels around their necks. They arrive as sentences we have to finish ourselves. But I knew this too. There had been too many small shadows. I knew the weight of a careful woman's suspicion, the ache of it in the sternum, like a bruise you get from bumping into the edge of a table in the dark. And I knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore. It would have been simpler, in some ways, to say nothing, to let myself finish this season of my life with photos and a gold foil card and a vase of lilies that would drop their pollen on the table and leave yellow stains. I would have liked to be only sentimental. I would have liked to be a woman whose biggest worry was what to do on Wednesday mornings, when she didn't have to get to homeroom by 8:15. Maybe I would join the water aerobics class at the rec center. Maybe I would say yes to the bus trip to Amish country in the fall. My whole life, I've looked for the simplest version of things. I even teach it. You start with the simplest sentence. You tell the truth until it stops squirming. But the truth felt like a bird perched just beyond me. I could hear it. I could see the quiver of the branch. I could not yet bring it to my hand. When I think about Kayla, I think about a moment last winter when we were all at their house for hot cocoa after sledding. The kids were pink-cheeked. The couch was damp with snow that had melted into mittens. Kayla made cocoa where she warmed the milk until it had that skin on it, and then whisked in shaved chocolate so thoroughly the difference between milk and chocolate vanished. It was beautiful. She handed me a mug with a paper-thin slice of orange floating like an ornament. I took a sip, and she watched me the way someone watches a soufflé. "Do you love it?" she asked, already ready to be gratified. It was delicious and too sweet and too much. "Yes," I said, because that was what she wanted. She smiled and turned away, and in her absence I watched Daniel pull Mason's wet sock inside out quietly, the way he had once learned all his small ways from me. Who teaches our children how to move? And where? And why? That is the question that sits under all other questions, like a board under a tablecloth. I am not interested in punishing. I do not want to humiliate. What do I want? To set the rug straight so people do not trip. To make sure the medicine is the medicine and the coffee is the coffee and the bank is the bank. To love my son without losing my sense. To save myself without turning our lives into a courthouse where everyone whispers as they pass through the metal detector. I have loved a great many children whose mothers did not know how to be kind to them yet. I have watched those women learn. They brought excuses into the first conferences like bouquets. They rolled their eyes at the very idea that they could be doing better. And then, sometimes, it changed. They softened, just a little, around the edges. They decided that their kids were people. They made a sandwich even though they were tired. They stopped yelling to see what would happen. It is not my job now to teach Kayla how to be a daughter-in-law to me or a partner to my son. But it is my job to say, here is what happened, and here is what I will not allow. At the end of the night, when Daniel texted me to say you were a rock star, Mom, and sent a photo of me with my arms full of presents I did not need, but would write thank you notes for anyway. I stared at the little bubbles of ellipses while he typed again. You feeling okay? He wrote. Did you have fun? Did Kayla go too hard on the speeches? His reflex, always, is to apologize for the ways other people might have broken something on my doorstep, as if he can triage the world with a gentle voice. I wrote back, I had a beautiful time. I felt steady. Please come for eggs this week, just you and me. He replied with a thumbs up and a breakfast emoji because he is still his mother's son, and because the part of him that knew my rules, 8 hours of sleep means I can be kind to you tomorrow, still lives inside him and sits up straight when I ask. I slept well, the kind of sleep that comes when you have done something difficult without raising your voice. In the morning, Cleveland did what it does. It put on a gray sweater and a blue scarf and went about its day. I made oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins, the way I've made it for myself since I was 23 and trying to stretch money. I checked the feeder to see if the cardinal would come, the one with the crooked beak. He did. I refilled my pill organizer. I took a breath. I dialed the doctor, and when I heard the staffer say Dr. Patel's office, I felt my lungs open in that clean way that comes when you make a plan and then follow it. There are women in my family who told stories around kitchen tables until the tea was cold. My grandmother used to say, if you can stand with your back to the sink and say it out loud without your voice wobbling, it's true enough to carry. I stood there at my sink and practiced, once, in a voice low enough only the cat heard me. Kayla put something in my drink. I switched the glasses. I was not crazy. I was careful. I will not be talked out of what I saw. My voice did not wobble. I do not know yet what this will demand of me. I do not know what words I will have to say, and in what order, to make them stick to the world. I know only that I have spent a lifetime building whole rooms out of patience and will, whole years out of spoonfuls of compassion, and that this is not the part where I learn to doubt what I have learned. There will be more to hold, more to forgive, more to ask for. There will be harder days. There is a part of me that wants to rush through them, to get to the end where the good people win and the bad people learn their lesson in a neat 22 minutes with commercials. But life is a longer story. It is a room you walk through every day, noticing new pictures, new scratches on the floor. I will set a place at the table for my son this week. I will make the eggs with dill the way he likes. I will pour him coffee I brewed myself. I will listen to him talk about a meeting that should have been an email. I will look at his face, which looks like his father's when he's trying not to be sad. I will tell him what I have seen and what I fear, without drama and without accusation. I will not let him make a joke to save me from the discomfort. I will say, I love you. And because I love you, I will not let you and I be separated by someone else's secrets. Then I will wait. There is nothing, after all, more powerful than the quiet after a clear statement. In that space, the future arranges itself, not as a thing pressed upon us, but as a story we make, together, if we're brave and lucky. For now, in this morning, that is the first of 1,000 I will have to fill without the bell schedule to guide me, I pull out a stack of blank note cards. I write the smallest truth I can write in blue ink. Thank you for seeing me. I will send them to the people who stood in that room with me. Mr. Ahmed, Lila, the principal who rhymed too much. I will write one to myself. It will say, "You trusted your instincts. You were kind enough to wait. You were wise enough not to pretend you didn't see what you saw." And then, when I have put my pen away and my dishes in the sink, I will go to the refrigerator, look at the glass pushed back behind the pickles, and take another breath. The days ahead will require steadiness and a spine. They will require me to be a teacher again, but in a classroom where there is only one student, and she is me. They will also, inevitably, require me to sit across from Kayla at some table, some afternoon in the near future, and say, "Use my name. It is Margaret. And while we are at it, let me tell you who I am and what I will not stand for. I will do it without raising my voice. I will do it with the same hands that have tied shoes, stapled booklets, held chins, clapped for small victories. I will do it because I have spent my life loving the world in practical ways. And this is one more way to practice." Outside, a truck backs up with a steady beep that sounds like someone practicing. The mail comes. The cat leaves. The phone rests face down on the table so I will not be tempted to fill the silence with the flick of my thumb. The house shifts in the way old houses do when the heat clicks on and the wood remembers winter. I am not alone. My mother and her mother, my students grown into their childbearing years, the teachers I've loved and who have died, all of them stand in the doorway of my small kitchen, like they did when there were cookies to be sampled and gossip to be shared. They remind me that lives are not broken by single drops, but by patterns we refuse to see. They remind me that it's never too late to ask for the world to be rearranged in your favor, even if only a bit. If the bigger conflict is coming, and I believe it is, I am ready not because I want to win, but because I want to stay. I want to stay inside the life I have built with my son. I want to stay safe inside my own skin. I want to stay the woman who knows how to trust her eyes when the chandelier light trembles on the surface of a glass, and something in the room goes still. I want to stay steady as marble, knees and all. So I will do what I have always done. I will plan. I will prepare. I will speak. And then I will go to the door when my son knocks, and I will open it, and I will make the eggs and set the plates and begin to tell the truth, one careful sentence at a time. I took the glass out from behind the pickles and set it on a paper towel like I'd set a caterpillar on a leaf for my first graders. Gentle, careful, like the thing itself was proof of a world you couldn't see yet. I wrote the date on a sticky note and slid both into a clean plastic bag. Then I put it back, behind the leftovers, out of sight, but not forgotten. It felt like I'd left a light on in an upstairs window, a quiet sign to myself that this was not a dream I could wake from and call nothing. The first appointment I made was with Dr. Patel's office. The receptionist put me on hold long enough for the entire second movement of a string quartet to play in a tinny loop. When the nurse came on, I spoke in the measured tone that adults use when we want to be taken seriously, and the words feel too heavy to hold with bare hands. I said, "I think I may have been given something that disagreed with me." I said, "I have been having odd spells." I said, "I trust my instincts, and they're ringing like the bell at St. Luke's." She didn't ask me to prove it. She said, "Come in this afternoon if you can, Margaret. Bring anything you have that might help." So I went, with my grocery bag holding the glass wrapped in a towel like a casserole, and my little lemon planner open to the page where I'd written a list. Coffee. Bitter. Lemon latte. Rug on stairs. Sleep tabs bottle. Missing pills. Bank alerts. Retirement party glass. Dr. Patel has a way of looking at you that makes you feel like you've been entered into a book. No judgment, just a line written in ink that doesn't smear. He listened. He read the list. He held the bag with the glass in both hands as if he were considering a science fair project that could change the world. He said, "I can't test this here. We don't have facilities. But I can document what you're telling me. I can order blood work, though from a party 2 days ago, it may not show much." He paused, then said, "It is not unreasonable to take care, Margaret." And then he did a small thing that felt big. He wrote down the name of a toxicology lab he trusted, and told me how to speak to them so they would listen to a woman like me. There are certain words you learn as life goes on, words you thought were for other people. Chain of custody, power of attorney, beneficiary. I've spent my life teaching words like paragraph and sentence, telling children that their thoughts deserved a home. Now I was learning a language to protect the home I had built, the body that lived inside it. I called Angela M., Lila's cousin, who does elder law and has a laugh that sounds like a kitchen filling itself with heat. She answered on the second ring. I didn't know how to begin, so I began the way I do with children, with a true thing I could say without my voice shaking. I am not looking to make a mess. I am looking to stay safe. Angela said, "That's a good place to start." She asked quiet questions. Had anyone asked me to sign papers recently? Anyone asked about my pension or life insurance? Any changes to my accounts? I told her about the attempted login at 1:13 a.m. I told her about the time Kayla had offered to help me simplify my mail. I told her about the reusable star folder which I still hadn't used. Angela said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put fraud alerts on your credit. We're going to freeze it with the big 3 agencies so no one can open new accounts pretending to be you. We're going to print your beneficiaries and keep a copy with me. We're going to get your will checked, not because you're going anywhere, but so that someone else knows you plan to stay." She paused, then added, "And if you want me there when you talk to your son, I can be. Or I can sit in the next room and eat one of your oatmeal cookies and only come in if you call my name." Her voice steadied me like the rhythm of a bus I've ridden my whole life. When we hung up, I stood in the doorway and looked at my house, the worn patches where our feet had trusted the floor too often to count. I've always had an object that kept me brave when I had to do something hard with children. My red pen, my lanyard with my laminated badge, the peppermint tin I passed around before tests. In the back of my desk drawer, under the rubber bands and paper clips and a ticket stub to a play, Daniel took me to one Mother's Day at the Playhouse. I found my old whistle. It's the dull silver kind they give to teachers who are asked to monitor recess, with a slight dent, because it spent most of its life bumping against my chest. I rubbed it with a tissue until the metal caught a little glint of light. That whistle moved children through fire drills and tornado warnings. It was a small thing that asked the world to listen. I slid the chain over my head. It rested where a necklace might. Light, but present. That would be my reminder. I still knew how to call a room to attention. I still knew how to ask for eyes forward, and mouths closed and ears open. There were new small things, in the days between the party and the breakfast I planned with Daniel, that added themselves to the list like uninvited guests. I went to the corner store and found that my usual yogurt had been replaced in my fridge with a brand that tastes chalky to me. The receipt in the bag wasn't mine. Kayla dropped by with a potted succulent and a card that said, "Good vibes, Maggie," and while I stood holding the plant, she drifted toward my dining table, glanced at my planner, and said, "You know, I can teach you how to use the calendar on your phone. It's so much easier for people like you, who forget to look down at paper." I watched her mouth on the word, forget. It lingered there a second too long, like a foot over a threshold, deciding whether to commit. One of the leaves on the succulent had been torn and pushed back into the soil like a small green ear. Then, there was the knock on my door from a woman with a clipboard and a smile as bright as the paper on it. "Hi," she said. "I'm from Home Safe Wellness. We're here to do your home fall risk assessment." I blinked. "I didn't order that," I said. "Oh," she replied, looking at her paper. "It says here your daughter arranged it." She glanced at me, then corrected herself. "Your daughter-in-law." I let her in, because I know from a lifetime of teaching that sometimes it's better to let a thing finish its speech than to try to talk over it. She pointed to the rug at the top of my basement stairs and said, "That's a trip hazard." I said, "I know." I told her that. We both knew who her meant. She noted it down. She admired my grab bar by the shower. She looked at my pill organizer and said, "Color-coded. Nice." She left after 20 minutes, leaving a printout with boxes checked. In the section marked Recommendations, one sentence shown: "Consider supervised living facility if family concerns persist." Kayla had written her name as the contact person. I called Daniel right away, my hand steady on the phone. He answered with his work voice. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" I told him about the assessment. He said, "Oh." Kayla didn't tell me she ordered that. He laughed. That light sound he makes when he's trying to put air between two heavy things. She's just being thorough. She worries. You know how she is. His words were simple, and so were mine. I said, "Daniel, do you know my middle name?" He said, "Of course I do. Lorraine." I said, "Right. Does a woman who remembers her middle name need someone else to decide whether her rug is dangerous?" There was a long pause. Finally, he said, "How about breakfast tomorrow? Just us. Eggs with dill. I'll be there at 9. The night before he came, I called Ms. Doherty at the community center. She runs the rentals and the card tables. She knows every family in our zip code and where they like to sit. I asked her, with the trembling that comes when you ask someone to believe you in writing, if there was a camera in the banquet room. "Oh, honey," she said immediately. "Someone lost their purse last month. We filmed back. We have cameras in the hallway." Should we look? I could hear papers shifting, a drawer opening. Lila had already told her I might ask. I stood there with the phone against my ear and watched the cardinal land on the cedar. A minute later, Ms. Dougherty said, "I can't see what's in the glass. I can see hands. I can see hers hover and dip toward where your cup was. I can see you slide your glass. I can see her take a sip." Her voice softened. "I can save it for you if you want to show your son. I can send you a clip." We both stayed silent a beat too long for strangers, feeling the weight of what that meant. "Yes," I said. "Please," she said. "I know this building like my own house. People get brave when they think the ceiling is low." The video arrived as a link that made my stomach turn. I watched it once, then closed it and put the phone face down. It felt wrong to look again. It felt like I was learning to live inside a new picture of the same room. I put my whistle on the kitchen counter, next to the bowl with the lemons. I touched it as I walked by like a talisman. "You are brave enough to call it," I told myself. When Daniel knocked in the morning, I opened the door with the whistle lying against my collarbone under my sweater. It was a weekday, but he was dressed like it was Saturday. Soft t-shirt, jeans, the sneakers he doesn't mind getting ketchup on. He bent to kiss my cheek and the air around him smelled like rain and printer toner and the soap he's used since college. We cooked together like we always have. Me chopping dill, him whisking eggs in a bowl and making a mess I will clean later with affection. He puts more butter in the pan than I do. He always has. We ate at the little table by the window, the one that looks out over the maple tree and the neighbor's patch of sunflowers that they bravely coaxed into life in Ohio. I poured him coffee from my old drip machine, the one that makes a sound like breathing. We talked about his meeting that should have been an email, about the Guardians having a good week, about how the cat has decided the laundry basket is his new bed. Then he set his fork down and looked at me, the way he looked at me when he was 5, and had broken a plate, and gathered the pieces in his hands and brought them to me like an offering. "Okay, Mom," he said softly. "Tell me what's happening." I told him. I did not use big words. I used the words we lived with. I said, "I think Kayla has been adding things to what I eat and drink that make me feel unsteady." He breathed in, an involuntary sound. I said, "I saw her hand over my glass at the party." I said, "I switched the glasses." I said, "I have the glass here." I said, "The coffee was wrong. The pills went missing. The logins on my bank at 1 a.m. The rug." I said, "She asked about my pension like it was a cashier asking paper or plastic." I said, "I want to think the best of her. I also want to stay alive, and my life to be mine." His face went through 3 seasons. First came winter, the freeze that grabs a tree suddenly after rain. He looked at the table, then at me. He said, "Mom, she would never..." Then the thaw. The moment when you think maybe he'll be able to hear. He rubbed his hands together and said, "What do you have? You know how my head works." He smiled a little, trying to make me laugh the way he did in 8th grade when I told him to focus. I slid the phone toward him with Ms. Dougherty's video cued to the moment when Kayla's hand appeared above my glass. He watched. His shoulders rose, then fell. He watched again. Then came spring. That tender thing where new growth is so fragile it could be ruined by a thumb. He said, "It could be anything. A nothing. A habit." He shook his head, eyes closed. He pressed the bridge of his nose between two fingers like he does when the world asks too much. I let the silence sit. Teachers learn to do that. Ask your question and let the room fill it. At last he said, in a voice so small it made my bones hurt, "What else?" I showed him the bank notification. I told him what Louise from Chase had said. I told him about Home Safe Wellness and the box on the form with supervised living. His hands tightened on the paper until it crinkled. He put his head down and looked at the wood grain like it could tell him what to do. He didn't cry. Not then. He took my hand and said, "I love you, Mom. I don't know what this is yet, but I love you. We will look. We will listen. We will be careful." Then he did a brave thing I did not expect. He said, "Don't talk to her alone. Not for now. Let me come back tonight. I'll bring the kids to my sister's. We'll make dinner like normal, and then..." He stopped. "And then what?" I asked. He looked at me, and there he was. My little boy turned man. The person who learned to tie his shoes on my lap, and later learned to be a father in front of me. He said, "Then we ask her to tell us the truth. Then we make a plan." There are moments when the world feels like it tilts and locks into a new position. That afternoon, I went to the toxicology lab Dr. Patel recommended. The door was heavy, with a bell that sounded like an ice cream cart. The man at the counter had eyebrows like arguments. He listened. He took the glass in his gloved hands and labeled it with patient care. He explained that time had passed and made things trickier. He said words like metabolites and detectability. He said they could test for common over-the-counter sleep aids, antihistamines, and sedatives. He said, "If it's there, we'll find it." He said, "We'll be careful." I signed papers. I left. In the parking lot, I put my hand to the whistle under my sweater and felt its cool circle answer to my palm. "Steady," I told myself. "Steady." Kayla texted at 3. "Hey, should I bring that lemon seltzer you liked for dinner?" Smiley face, citrus slice, heart. I typed back, "Water is fine, thank you." My name at the top of the thread was Maggie. I stared at it and did not bother to correct her. Some corrections you save for when people are listening. I set the table the way my mother did when there was something important to say. Cloth napkins, the good plates, a small jar of flowers from the backyard, even if all you could find was a brave dandelion. I put the whistle where the chain lay warm against my skin. Angela texted to say, "Want me on standby?" I wrote, "Yes. Maybe call around 8. Daniel arrived with the kids. Their cheeks were sun-warmed. They tumbled into my house like happiness does. I kissed heads, gave them apple slices with cinnamon, showed them the jigsaw puzzle spread out on the card table. If the world is about to change, you give the children something with edges and a picture that makes sense. Kayla came 15 minutes later, carrying a salad in a glass bowl so beautiful it made you see yourself in it. Her perfume arrived first, light and sunny as an ad. She kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Maggie, I brought that dressing you liked. It's got a little lavender oil. So calming." She winked. Daniel took the salad and put it on the counter. He smiled at her the way you tighten a rope. We all moved like a dance we hadn't practiced. Me at the stove, Daniel at my elbow, Kayla arranging forks in a fan like a magazine spread. It would have looked perfect from the street. We ate. The kids told me about a bug Mason had found, a yellow jacket, how they rescued it with a spoon and put it outside. Ava composed a tower of cucumber slices and balanced a cherry tomato at the top and called it a hat. We didn't say what we came to say. You don't talk in front of children about how the world might change. You preserve one more hour of normal when you can. After dinner, Daniel loaded the dishwasher a little too loudly. Kayla rinsed the salad bowl and said, "Gosh, your water pressure, Maggie. We need to get someone in here to look at it." She laughed, a bright clink like cutlery. The kids ran like a parade to the living room. I started to clear plates. The whistle under my sweater caught, just for a second, on the fabric, like it wanted to be seen. Daniel said, "Hey Mason, how about you show Nana your new Lego rocket in the back room? And maybe Ava can help me put the leftovers in containers?" He was making arrangements with his voice, the way his father used to when he wanted two things to happen at once. Kayla dried her hands and glanced at her phone. The kids moved. The house retuned itself to a smaller scale. It was just the three of us in the kitchen now, with the window open a bit, and the evening carrying the far-off sound of a train. I reached for the whistle. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. I am not a woman who likes spectacle. I pulled it out and set it on the table and rested 2 fingers on it. Kayla cocked her head. A polite curiosity moved across her face. "Is that new?" she asked. I said, "It's old. It's my teacher whistle. It called fire drills. Sometimes it called for quiet." I looked at Daniel. He nodded. He put his hand, brown and long-fingered like his father's, on the back of a chair. Then I said, "Like a teacher in a room with children who had done their best and now needed to do better." Eyes on me for a moment. Kayla laughed lightly. "Sure." She leaned back against the counter, a pose you see in catalogs, woman in linen, casual against a clean kitchen. Her nails were exactly the color of the lipstick she likes. I took a breath. I said, "Kayla, at my party, you put something in my drink." I moved the glass. "You tasted what you meant for me. Then you went to the restroom. Then you spent an hour beside me with your hand on my arm like everything was ordinary." Her smile stayed on like makeup even after the party ends. She opened her mouth. I lifted my hand an inch, not to shush, but to hold the floor. I said, "Before you tell me I'm mistaken or tired or sensitive, I want you to know I saw you. Lila saw you. The camera in the hallway saw your hand over my glass. I have the glass. It is being tested." I said it all gently. I have learned that if you speak softly, the words do not break when they land. She blinked. For the first time, something human passed over her face. A shadow, the kind that can be mercy or fear. "Ridiculous," she said, the word glinting. "Why would I ever—" She stopped. She ran her fingers along the counter like she was smoothing fabric. Her turn of the head was slow, measured. Daniel said her name like a prayer. "Kayla." He stepped closer to me. He wasn't protecting me, not exactly. He was holding the space between us like a rope someone might trip over if they weren't careful. Kayla laughed again, but the sound didn't have a place to sit. She said, "Maggie, you've been stressed. It happens. You retire, your routine changes, you start seeing little things as big things. I put a drop of lemon bitters in your drink, that's all. Like they do at nice bars, because you always like citrus. You made a face earlier when I brought the latte, so I thought—" She stopped because she could hear herself making a story as she went. She reached for her clutch, then thought better of it, then reached again, then stopped. The cupboard doors seemed to hold their breath. Daniel said, "Lemon bitters aren't clear, Kayla." He wasn't angry. He was speaking a sentence you memorize because you need it later. He was steady, and in his steadiness, I heard my voice. Kayla's eyes filled with tears fast, too fast, tears that arrived like an actor's cue. She said, "I was trying to help. You get so tired, Margaret. If you admit it, we can all—" She swallowed the "we like it" had gotten too big to say politely. She said, "You stumble sometimes. I've seen you. You write things down because you know." I thought a little. Her hand fluttered in the air, illustrating the tiny size of her claim. "Would make you sleep. It was the end of a long career. I wanted you to rest. That was my gift." She smiled then, a soft, pitying thing, as if she had just described the weather and found herself reasonable inside it. I felt the old classroom rise up in me. The hum, the faces, the feeling that in this room I know what's what. I picked up the whistle. I didn't blow it. I didn't need to. I said, "My name is Margaret, use it." I said, "If you want me to rest, ask me to rest. You don't make my choices for me." I slid the napkin with her lipstick, the one I had tucked into the sleeve of my cardigan at the party, onto the table, its corner folded like a flag. I said, "When a person touches another person's drink without asking, that is not help. When a person asks questions about pensions and writes their name on forms for assessments nobody ordered, that is not care. It is control. Her tears stopped like a faucet turned. She stared at the napkin. She stared at Daniel. She looked at the window, at the maple. Finally, she said, "You're making this into something it isn't. Everyone does little things to help their older family." The word older sat there and tried to build a house on top of me. I didn't let it. I reached under my sweater and lifted the chain and set the whistle gently in my palm, a small, bright moon. Then the phone on the counter lit up with Angela's name. I didn't pick up yet. I said, "We are going to put some things in writing. We are going to set boundaries. You are not to come into my home without me here. You are not to touch what I eat or drink unless I ask you to. You are not to reach into my mail. You are not to call anyone to assess me without my consent. You will not, under any circumstance, ask about my pension or bank accounts. You will not log into anything with my name on it. Daniel will be listed as my emergency contact and no one else. If I have to, I will file a report and hand them the glass, the video, and the bottle I found beneath the seat of my car. I will do that not to punish you, but to make the world official so that I can sleep at night." Kayla's face changed then, in a way I had not seen. She wasn't a villain in that moment. She was a person whose version of herself had been interrupted. She lifted her chin. For a breath, there was something soft under the hard. You could see it if you were looking. Then she reached for indignation like a coat. She said, "I can't believe you'd do this to us, Margaret. After everything I've done for this family, Sunday school crafts, the endless driving, the appointments, the..." She caught Daniel's eye and stopped. She threw a tilt of her head in my direction, a gesture she had perfected, and said, "She needs help, Daniel. Why can't you see that? My mother says..." She bit off the rest because she had realized too late what it sounded like. It amazed me, even then, how we keep reaching for the scripts that make us neat. Daniel stood, both hands on the back of the chair now, his knuckles showing. He said, "Kayla, stop." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said, "Did you put anything in my mother's drink? Yes or no?" She looked at him for a long time and then said, "I put a little something to take the edge off." "Lots of people do." She shrugged, like we were discussing salt. There it was. The thing that had been circling the room finally sat down at the table and said its name. The whistle in my hand felt nearly weightless. I did not gloat. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a person finishing a test she had taken her time on, turning it face down and pushing it away gently. I said, "That's enough." She flicked a glance at the garbage can, as if evaluating how fast she could throw this moment away. I picked up the whistle and tucked it back under my sweater, where it lay against my skin, like a penny warmed by the sun. I said, "Daniel and I will be going to the precinct in the morning to make a report." I said it calmly, the way you say remember your lunch. Kayla stepped back like I had set the stove to high. She put both hands on the counter and pressed, as if bracing herself in a train car. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked from me to Daniel and back again. She tried one more time, this time reaching for a memory like a person grabs a scarf. "Maggie, I brought you a pie that first time," she said, as if generosity could serve as a magic wand. I smiled then, sadly. "Yes," I said, "and you took my mother's pie server home without asking." She flinched. "You can bring it back," I added gently. "Tomorrow would be fine." She left before the kids came back in the room. She didn't slam the door. Her shoes made that careful, fast sound on the walk, the one I had heard at the community center when she went to the restroom with mint on her breath. Daniel and I stood in the quiet. The train sound from outside had gone. The evening had shifted into that old Cleveland thing where the sky is the color of an old t-shirt and the streetlights click on and mean well. Daniel sat. He put his head into his hands. The skin at the back of his neck looked so much like his father's that for a second the room filled with a ghost I hadn't invited and yet needed to see. I went to him and put my palm there, the way I used to when he had a fever. He took a breath that shuddered on the way out. He looked up at me and the tears were there, finally. Honest and unpretend. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry. I should have. He couldn't find the rest, and I did not make him. Sorry is not a fix. It's a doorway. The kids reappeared with their towers and rockets and pressed themselves against us. Life wants to be lived in the middle of whatever story you're telling. They asked for ice cream, and I said yes to 1 scoop. And then, because they had waited like champions, I gave them 2. When they were in the living room again, burrowed into the couch like puppies, Daniel and I sat at the table and wrote what we would do. He would stay at a hotel with the kids that night. He would talk to Kayla about staying with her parents for a while. We would talk to Angela and Dr. Patel. We would bring the glass to the precinct. He asked me if I wanted him to stay, and I said no, because I know the difference between company and help. He kissed my head and left through the back so the children wouldn't see the shape of his face. It was later, the cat darting at moths, the house exhaling its old bones, when my phone trilled again. It was Angela. Her voice was ready for the shape of things. I told her what we had done. She told me what we would do next. She said, "You were exact. You were kind. You were boundaried. That's all any of us can be." I touched the whistle. I wished briefly I had blown it, if only to release the pressure that had pressed the air down to a thinner shape. But it was enough to lay it there, to let it witness. The morning brought gray light and a carefulness to the day. Daniel texted that he and the kids were at the hotel by the lake, the kind with a breakfast bar that makes waffles in the shape of Ohio. He sent a photo of the kids' feet sticking out from under the covers, sticky with syrup. Kayla sent nothing, which was a relief and a grief. I put on a sweater the color of leaves in late October and tied a scarf that had belonged to my mother. I put the glass in my bag, wrapped in a towel. I put the napkin and the video on a little flash drive Lila's grandson helped me make because he lives to make old things new. And then I did something I have asked 1,000 children to do when they felt shaky. I drank a glass of water. I ate a banana. I put on shoes that would not slip. The desk sergeant at the precinct had the calm of a person who has seen how ordinary, extraordinary moments are. He listened to me. He watched the video. He took the bag with the glass and labeled it. He explained that this might take time. He said we were doing the right thing by writing it down. He made a copy of my driver's license and asked me to spell my middle name. Lorraine, I said, and then I spelled it slowly, the way I teach. Lorraine. He smiled. He said, "My aunt's name was Lorraine." He printed something and handed it to me, a case number. It wasn't comfort. It was a kind of seat to sit down in when you are tired of standing. As we left, a young officer held the door for me. He nodded at the whistle around my neck like he recognized a kind of rank. The toxicology lab called 2 days later. The man with the eyebrows left me a message that didn't say anything, because messages can't say much. He asked me to call back. When I did, he said they had found traces of diphenhydramine, an antihistamine that makes some people very sleepy, and trazodone, an antidepressant that is sometimes used to help people sleep, in concentrations that suggested more than casual contact. He said, "It's not a crime for someone to take those. The question is how they got into your glass." He paused. He knew, and I knew, and the law would decide. I thanked him. I felt not vindicated. No one wins when the truth is sad. But steadied. A chair is a chair. The floor is the floor. If you can name a thing, you can begin to decide what to do next. What we did next was live forward in the small ways that become large when you line them up. I froze my credit. I set up 2-factor authentication on the bank and on the email, even though the code thing makes me mutter. I changed the lock on my front door, not cheekily, but with the quiet of a person who knows that an open door invites weather. Lila came and sat with me while the locksmith worked, and she told me about her niece's new rabbit, which she named Pancake. It was a comfort that had nothing to do with courtrooms and everything to do with continuing. Kayla called, finally, and left a message that said, "Maggie, we should talk like adults, not involve outsiders." She texted Daniel that I was overreacting, that she had read online that retired people go through cognitive dips, and that she had only wanted to prevent me from a fall, or from being, her word, vulnerable. She called me a dear. I wrote back in the simplest sentence I could. "My name is Margaret. Please speak through Daniel or Angela for now." She sent nothing else, and the quiet felt like when the refrigerator turns off and you hear the house breathing. There are women who thrive on chaos, and women who thrive on certainty. I am the second kind. There's no pretending otherwise. The week after the report, I found myself rearranging my pantry, not because it needed it, but because the labels I stick on flour and sugar make a small order in a world that resists being categorized. I put the tea in a basket. I lined up cans. I threw away old spices. The cat watched me from the table like I was building a fort. In the half-light of late afternoon, I took out the pie server that Kayla brought back. A silent bag hung on my doorknob with a note that said, "Here, if it means so much to you." I turned it over and read the tiny, etched initials. M.A., my mother's maiden name. It did mean that much to me, not because of the object, but because it had survived our hands. I slid it back into its place. Angela came over with folders. The way teachers come into a classroom carrying too much, because we are afraid of leaving something we might need. She sat at my table and explained my options the way I once explained place value. Calm, straightforward, leaving room for questions. The police were investigating. That would take time. In the meantime, we could request a temporary protective order to keep Kayla from my home. We could ask Daniel to go to counseling with someone who understood that love and harm sometimes get braided together before we can name the chords. We could notify school that if anyone called with stories about me being confused, they should hang up and call me. We could tell the bank to put sticky notes on my file in their minds. If a young woman calls and says she is Margaret's helper, the answer is no. In the weeks that followed, there were waves that hit and ebbed. Kayla cried to her mother. Her mother called me and left a message full of soft words that were knives. Concern, safety, misguided. She asked me to consider the stress I was putting on my son. I did not call her back. I did not owe her my story. Daniel moved in silence that was both grief and relief. He brought the kids to my house on Sundays, and we made grilled cheese and tomato soup as if it were winter, even when it was warm. He and Kayla met with a counselor. He reported back in short sentences. He slept, finally, really slept, with the line of his mouth a little less tight. And me? I taught myself a new routine. I walked early on the towpath, where the canal remembers when it held barges. I made friends with a woman who walks her old beagle in a sweater. We didn't ask each other for anything except names. I baked Buckeye brownies for the neighbor boys' fundraiser. I played Scrabble with Lila and lost, because she has a miner's gift for finding Z's. I went to the West Side Market and bought peaches and held them against my cheek, to feel the fuzz like a memory. I was not waiting. I was living, but with my head tilted slightly toward a sound I knew would come, like rain. The sound came as a knock one evening, when the sky was the color of a bruise you get from bumping into hope. Daniel stood on my porch with a bag of takeout from the place on Detroit Avenue that does pierogies like pillows. He looked older. He looked solid. He said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back. He set the bag on the counter and took out cartons as if we were a family that had never known argument. We ate standing up, which is an old habit we both enjoy. Then he said, "Mom, the police called. They're done. It will go to the prosecutor to decide." He swallowed. He closed his eyes briefly and opened them. He said, "Kayla wants to meet you at the park. She says she wants to apologize. Only you." He lifted his hands. He knows me. He knows that my inclination is to meet people on their ground, to hear. He also knows this is not a parent-teacher conference. He said, "I'll go with you. I'll wait. We don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. I can say no for you." I touched my whistle. I said, "I will go, because I am not afraid of the truth standing on grass." We went. The park was Tremont, where fairy lights had once made my son's vows shimmer like August. The same tree that had leaned over their ceremony stood with its arms out, a little older, like all of us. Kayla stood near the gazebo in a white sweater, hair crisp, the kind of beauty that comes from control. When she saw me, she put her hands out, palms up, an old theater trick to show you have nothing to hide. I walked toward her with Daniel 10 paces behind. My whistle lay warm under my blouse. She said, "Margaret," my name, used like a magic trick to prove she had listened after all. She said, "I was wrong. I see that now. I was afraid you would be a problem to solve instead of a person to love. I thought if I could make you sleep more, you'd—" She trailed off. It was one of the more honest admissions I've heard in my life. She looked at the grass, at a dog running with its tongue sideways, at the people who moved around us with their own stories, not knowing ours. She said, "I'm scared. I don't know who I am if I'm not in charge. I didn't mean to hurt you." She lifted her eyes. She did not cry. The absence of tears felt like a gift. I said, "The thing about meaning to is that it doesn't matter much when someone else is the one falling." I said, "You will not manage me. You will not touch what is mine. If you want to be in this family, you will come to it like a person, not a brand. You will make amends to Daniel for putting him in a chair with two people he loves on either side of him with their hands extended, both saying, 'Listen to me. That's not a spot any man deserves.' You will apologize to my body for what you did to it, because it is my first house. You will apologize to your own self for behaving in a way that made you small." She listened. She nodded. She said, "I can sit with that." She said, "I am in counseling." I said, "Good." She said, "If charges get filed." I said, "That is not up to me alone. That is the world deciding it wants to be fair today." She nodded. She looked over my shoulder at Daniel. He gave a little nod, too, a courtesy of a man who understands that ending a thing is work. The prosecutor called a week later to say the case would be handled in a way that sought to keep harm from happening again. Classes, probation, a record that says we tell the truth in an orderly way. It was not a victory. It was a path. Daniel and Kayla separated quietly. The kids learned new patterns. Backpacks going to 2 places, 2 calendars on the fridge. They adjusted better than the adults, as children do when you tell them the truth with love and peanut butter sandwiches. The world did not end. It rearranged. In my living room, on a shelf where I keep the old picture books, because the children who visit me always sit on that rug first, I put a small frame with the letter L in it. Not for love, though yes, for that. For Lorraine. For the part of me that is not an appendage of anyone else's story. On the table by the door, I placed my whistle in a little dish with paper clips and stamps. Once in a while, when I am tidying, I pick it up and I feel its weight. I think about the night in the community center, when the bubbles held a tremor of chandelier light, and the room was full of kindness and danger, and I said nothing, because silence is also a tool when you use it correctly. I think about the napkin, the lipstick, the hallway camera, the way time wraps what we do in a coat and names it later. And then I go to my kitchen and I make eggs with dill for my son and sometimes for myself, because there are days when feeding your own mouth is the bravest act in the room. I plant marigolds by the steps because my mother did, and because they smell like strong tea, and summers I survived. In the morning, I open the window and listen to the city lift itself into its day. Trucks beep, buses sigh. Somewhere someone shouts a greeting down Lorraine Avenue like it's a song. The cardinal with the crooked beak still comes. He has outlasted cats and storms by being careful and hungry for the small red berries that only ripen after the last surprise frost. I have not stopped being a teacher. I have one student now, and she is me, and her homework is to remember that kindness and boundaries are twins. I write it at the top of my list on Mondays. Be generous, be clear. I am. I am also done pretending that a woman must choose between being beloved and being safe. My whistle sits in its dish, waiting not for emergencies, but for the moments when the room needs me to call it to attention. I am not above using it on myself now and then. I blow it in the memory of that banquet room. A soft puff, alone in my kitchen. And I stand still until the world around me settles, the way children do when they are given the dignity of being asked to listen. There is a certain kind of peace that comes after an earthquake. Not the kind where everything is put back as it was, but the kind where you know where the cabinets open, where the plates will fall if you slam the door. You move differently. You keep water where you didn't before. You take nothing for granted. You also invite your friends over. and you laugh so loud that the house remembers itself as a place planning for joy. Lila brings casseroles I don't need. Mr. Ahmed waves with both hands from his store when I walk over to buy blueberries. People in this city have known how to rebuild with their hands forever. We carry that skill in our bodies. When I close my eyes at night, I see the moment at the party when Kayla's hand trembled, and the light split across her ring and her knuckles, pale. And I think, the body tells on the heart. Mine did. Hers did. Everyone's will in the end. If I could teach anything to the children I love now, the ones who made me cards with wobbly letters, and the ones who grew up and bring me flowers on their paydays, it would be this. Believe the tremor. Listen to the buzz. If your drink tastes wrong, if the rug appears where it shouldn't, if someone says your name wrong and smiles while they do it, you are allowed to ask the world to set itself right. And then, one evening when the light comes in sideways and makes the dust look like glitter, and a song from the 70s you didn't know you remembered finds you on the radio, you will find yourself standing in your kitchen with a whistle in your pocket and a pie server in your drawer, and a boy you raised sitting at your table, and you will think, I stayed. I did not go quiet to make other people comfortable. I did not blow the whistle too soon or too late. I held it in my hand until the moment came and I knew. Now. And that is when you will feel your knees, steady as marble. That is when you will know you came through. That is when you will know you came through. The park smelled like cut grass and something fried from a concession stand. After Kayla left, after the prosecutor's letter arrived and the calendar changed shape, there was a sort of creaking in the house the way an old porch surrenders to summer. It was not all heavy. Some of it was relief, the kind that comes when you open windows you have been afraid to lift. People began to notice in small, practical ways. Mr. Ahmed waved at me twice as I crossed the street instead of once. Lila brought over a casserole on a Tuesday, a dedicated, prideful casserole that lasted 3 generous lunches. The principal from Harvey Elementary called just to remind me that the classroom door was always open to me for reading day, that my name belonged to the school in a good way. Daniel and I set new rhythms. He came for Sunday lunches, sometimes bringing pierogies from Detroit Avenue the way his father used to when he wanted to say, I love you without the fuss. We made a calendar together and stuck it on my fridge in thick Sharpie. Therapies, visitation, appointments. There were small, almost ridiculous things that became talismans. A second key that Daniel asked Lila to keep. A note in my wallet that said, call Angela first. And of course, the whistle in its little dish by the door where stamps and paper clips live. I liked the sound of it there. It looked like a promise with a hinge. There were public things to do as well. The prosecutor's office offered an outcome that was not about vengeance, but about prevention. Kayla would have to attend mandatory classes on elder abuse and boundaries. There would be probation conditions, and a record that meant there would be consequences if the past repeated itself. It was, in the language of law, a path to keep me safe, and to teach Kayla that intent didn't erase hurt. I did not gloat when the facts were read. I stood the way I had in front of 4th graders taking spelling tests, calm, fair, precise, and I let the world apply its tools. Kayla's apology was slow and measured, the kind people practice in front of bathroom mirrors. She did come back in fits and starts, not into my house but into small spaces around a life that was now open to witnesses. She came to counseling. She came with a list of books and a therapist's name. She offered to meet me at church bake sales, to bring Mason for a Saturday of Lego building. I listened because listening is what I teach, and because people can make wrong turns that are not the end of them. She kept the pie server returned in a soft paper towel tied in a bow, and when she left it on my doorknob, I thought of the small, infuriating way habits can be theft, and restitution can be simple. That was enough for the moment. Restitution doesn't have to be dramatic. It only has to be real. There were days the neighborhood felt like a classroom again, noisy, cluttered, full of potential. The kids adapted quicker than any of the adults expected. Mason learned that some weekends he would sleep at Nana's, and other weekends he would sleep in 2 beds at 2 houses. He didn't like change, but he loved grilled cheese and the way I let him butter the bread like it was his job. Ava came to my table and taught me how to build a tower of cucumber slices better than I had ever managed. The children made a map of the week with stickers and crayons. They called the days Nana days and both days. Their language was practical and kind. There were conversations that required tools I had only used on report cards and parent nights. Daniel and Kayla sat in a counselor's office across from one another, and both tried, in their different ways, to say what they felt. Daniel learned new phrases. I feel, I need, and used them until they felt less foreign. Kayla learned that control can mask fear. We all have our ways of trying to manage the world. It was messy. There were evenings when the mail still showed a printed arrangement of Kayla's name in the corner of a form, and I felt my stomach drop the way it does when you think you've lost something that matters. There were other evenings when she sent a text to Daniel that read simply, "Tell your mom I am trying." The word trying can be small and big at once. It can be a beginning. I learned, too, how to ask for help without losing myself. Angela came over with folders and a calmness like warm bread, procedures, petitions, the very practical steps that make a life safe. Credit freezes, attorney contacts, a lock changed on the front door that felt less like an act of fear than an act of stewardship. Lila sat with me while the locksmith measured the deadbolt and made jokes that were as necessary as prayers. We baked cookies to hand to the officers because it felt right to offer sweetness to those moments that ask more than we think they ever will. The community that raised me did not call me embattled. They called me their neighbor. The whistle, which had been the modest talisman around my neck, became a metaphor I carried like a coin. I found myself holding it, not to sound it to summon help, but to remind myself of how delicate authority can be. A whistle can stop recess and call children to line up. It can also be the thing you keep to remember you are allowed to call the room to order, to name danger, to make a boundary. Sometimes at night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile, I would polish it and feel its coolness against my fingers. Once, I blew it very softly, a single breath, and the sound surprised the cat into the doorway. It was ceremonial in a way I had not expected, a soft claim that I belonged to my body. There were neighbors who disagreed. Rumors are like dandelion seeds. They travel and land in odd places. Kayla's mother called and said kinder things at first, and then words that felt sharp and expectant. Are you sure? Are you sure you're not tired, Margaret? I didn't return the call right away. I sat with the question she asked as if it were a bowl. I could have been weary. I am 67. Tiredness is a frequent guest, but tired and manipulated are not the same. There was a line that could not be blurred, and I drew it with the same chalk I had used in classrooms for 40 years, in straight, careful strokes. What surprised me was the small but profound kindness that kept arriving. The librarian at the branch the kids like left a stack of picture books on my porch with a note. For reading day. The woman from Home Safe Wellness, embarrassed by how her clipboard had been used, called to apologize for any confusion and offered me a discount on a fall-proof grab bar that I didn't need, but appreciated, because someone recognized what had been done. Mr. Ahmed brought over a pie. No questions asked. Just a loaf of kindness wrapped in foil like the city wraps its hands around its people. These gestures stitched a neighborhood back to itself. Eventually, the rawest parts of the legal process cooled. Kayla completed the classes, met conditions, and the record remained. An honest line on a ledger that said you touch someone's life in a way the law finds wrong. She and Daniel separated. It was a quiet, private thing. Daniel moved through grief with the pragmatic movements of a man who knows both how to mend a fence and how to mourn a loss. He came over more than he left. We sat on the porch with lemonades and spoke of small things like the weather and larger things like what it meant to be held by two people who need you. And then one day, after months that felt like a school year, Kayla arrived at the back porch with Mason and Ava, not at the head of a procession, but with hands empty and eyes softer. She brought a salad bowl without lavender oil and an offer that felt like a white flag. Would it be possible for us to find a way? She didn't ask to come into my house. She asked if I would consider a structured, supervised way for the children to see her. I told her that I wanted my grandchildren in my life and that I loved them, and that if we were to reweave our family, it would have to be in threads stronger than control. There was reconciliation, but not return to what had been. Kayla's apology matured into action over time. She came regularly to therapy and admitted to patterns she had been defending for years. She volunteered at the preschool in small, accountable ways, under supervision at first, then with reports. It was not dramatic. It was not a movie ending. It was, instead, something truer, a long, painstaking re-education of behavior. She learned the language of boundaries. She learned, gradually and humbly, to ask before she helped. When she finally asked my name properly, Margaret, not Maggie, not anything clipped or borrowed, it was as if she had learned to see me. For my part, I held firm to the things that kept me safe. I kept my kitchen lit and my fridge orderly. I kept the whistle near the door, not to threaten, but to remember. I continued to take my walks on the towpath and to buy peaches at the West Side Market and to lose at Scrabble with Lila until she teased me about my little words. I took Molly, the beagle in the sweater, for a walk once in a while with her owner, and we remarked on the way the river keeps on, whether there's a storm or not. I also taught again, sometimes in the literal way, when the county asked me to come read to an after-school program, sometimes in a quieter way, by setting an example of boundaries. The whistle came to mean something else in the neighborhood. Once, at a tiny meeting at the community center where women in our zip code talked about safety and about the small ways neighbors can watch out for one another, I took out my whistle and explained why I kept it. I told them about the taste of my champagne and the way the light split off Kayla's ring. I told them, quietly and carefully, about the napkin and the camera and the way the world sometimes wants to decide for you. People listened. A few women cried, which is the same as saying they were feeling their stories recognized. We formed a little group that exchanged contacts and vetted handymen, and set up a rotating check-in for older folks who lived alone. The whistle sat on the table like a modest flag. There were days of peace that were simple enough to be almost boring. I kept a small frame on the shelf with the letter L in it, a quiet tribute to Lorraine, my middle name, and to the long line of women who had taught me to be both gentle and steady. I planted marigolds by my steps and watched them stand angry and bright at the edges of the porch. The cardinal with the crooked beak kept coming, never quite neat, always brave for a small seed. The cat slept in the window and dreamed of birds. I made eggs with dill for Daniel when he came by, and for myself sometimes. The ritual of breakfast was a way of honoring survival. I wrote thank you cards in my lemon planner to the people who had stood in my corner. Writing things down made them real. Time did not erase what happened. The memory of that glittering banquet room and Kayla's hand remains in me like a scar that taught me new skin. But the day-to-day of my life looked different. Steady, but with a new spine. I was not bitter. I was wiser. I was also kinder to myself in ways that had been difficult before. I stopped apologizing for being careful. I stopped referring to boundaries as unloving. I corrected a neighbor once when she spoke over me about the way elder folks get cranky. I said, "My name is Margaret. I am not cranky. I am particular." We laughed, and then we spoke. One afternoon, late into an October that held the kind of light that makes everything spare and precious, Daniel and I sat at my table with the windows open a sliver. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw his father in the set of his jaw. "You did more than hold a whistle," he said. "You held a thing steady until we could see it." My knees felt like marble in the sunlight. I thought of all the children who had looked to me for directions, for rules, for a voice that would not break. I thought of the many small ways I had practiced saying no without being cruel. I thought of Kayla, imperfect and human, learning as we all must. There is mercy, and there is safety. There does not have to be a choice between them. The whistle rests now in its dish, gleaming a little from the days I've rubbed it. When I tie it on a long necklace sometimes to go to a meeting, it feels like the mooring of a small boat. Not a raucous horn, but a quiet anchor. The napkin with the faint smear of Kayla's lipstick is folded carefully into a journal, not to punish, but to remember why I learned to listen to the tremor of a room. The pie server lives in the drawer with its mother's initials like a quiet return. The children bring me drawings and lists and the occasional mismatched sock. They bring me the big, unsentimental lessons of forgiveness and expectation. If there is a last lesson I would hand to anyone who needs it, I would give it a sentence and a pot of tea. Believe the tremor. Name the small things. Be gentle with the people learning to be better, but do not give away your life for the favor of being liked. That balance is the work of a lifetime. It is the arithmetic of living well. So I keep my lemon planner on the table with a stack of cards and a pen. I water the marigolds. I take the whistle into my pocket when I walk by the river, and sometimes, just once or twice a year, I take it out and blow a note so soft the ducks look up, so the air knows I am still here, listening. I blow it not to call anyone else to order, but to remind myself that I will answer if my life needs me. I will call for help. I will set the room straight. I stayed. I did not go quiet to make other people comfortable. I kept my name. I kept my life. The marble in my knees has a story, and so does the light in my kitchen. They tell me I did right by the small, brave truths of my body. When the 70s playlist plays, sometimes on purpose, in the middle of a mundane Tuesday, I let the Bee Gees or the Carole King fill the counters, and I dance with the cat in a way that feels like a benediction. If my story moved you, please tell me in the comments below. Tell me about a time you trusted yourself, or about a small object that keeps you brave. If you'd like to hear more from me, more afternoons, more recipes, more ways to stand still and say your name, leave a like and subscribe so we can keep company on the other side of fear. It helps more than you know. Remember, the body tells on the heart, and when you trust that tremor, you give yourself back the future.